Anyway, so to start off, it's called Saved by Our Son, Adolescent Resistance Behavior in High Demand Groups. It's called a Swedish-American study because our son was born in Sweden, and then we had a relatively benign cult experience here, but then we made the mistake of devoted followers everywhere and moved to the center of the center next to the feet of our guru, and that's when the big problem started. So, the thing that I thought I would write about here was the opposite dynamic of what you normally read about, how distraught parents are trying to get their kids out of these crazy cults. This was the opposite. Our son tried to get his true believer parents out of a cult after he realized what was going on. And he struggled for 2 years to get us out of that cult as he was going through his own adolescent phase, shall we say, of rebellion and search for identity. And any of you, how many have teenager children here? Okay, you'll know what I'm saying. It's not a fun time. It's very hard to perceive whether the adolescent is just acting out, if it's hormonal, if he just is, becoming, reclusive and bitter and all the rest of the things. But we found out that it was not the Eriksonian mind, that he's just going through a phase. He actually found out the truth, and his strong ethical background, which I guess after the fact we can take some credit for, led him to risk his life, literally, to get us out and to get the information out into the society about our corrupt guru, who was very deceitful and deceptive. So in that case, he was the one who saved his parents. I put in, if you're interested in the fuller version of this, all the citations to Lalick and all these things about true believers, the difference between people on the fringes or people who have not committed to the same extent as true believers. We were true believers. We were in there for a quarter of a century. We had basically left Sweden and Norway with 4 suitcases and lived in the slums of Queens very happily, I must say. For how long? 20 years?
Half of the time, I would say, 80s.
So we, in a sense, lived a life of true believers. We gave up a lot. We got a lot. And some of our best years of our life were in the beginning of this time, and then the worst years of our life were in the end of that time. And I know a lot of you are, I see you're nodding. You get a lot of gold, but you get a lot of gravel. And as time went on, as the guru became more and more narcissistic, it kind of degenerated rapidly. But we're not going to go into that. I wanted to kind of focus on our son because in our eyes he became a hero. And also, I might say to many other people in the group, he actually set up the first website with first-person testimonials of these divine concubines or inner circle girls, as they were called, that none of us had the slightest inkling that there was sex going on there. This was a celibate cult. We were supposed to be celibate. We were the exception because we came in as a family, but we were planning to have a second child. Gunilla wanted to, and they said no. So there was no more children. But we had each other and we had our son. As a result of that kind of unusual situation, our son was like the golden-haired boy with blue eyes, and everybody loved him. So his childhood was wonderful. There were not many children, as you can imagine, in a celibate group. And the few children there were, all of the young adolescent boys left, as you can also imagine, except for the boys that happened to be gay. In any case, he stayed there as long as he was a child, and then he started doing the rebellious behavior that's called this kind of resistance behavior that Erikson also talks about, which is necessary for adolescents to define their own identity, which they're trying to do at this stage. So he was trying to find his identity, he was acting out, he was rebelling, all natural. My wife and I thought, oh, that's teenagers for you, but he's going to get kicked out. And at this time, we were true believers and thought that our guru was our salvation, basically. And that he would go down and maybe we would never see him again, because we had experienced him in the group before. And I know those of us who saw the shunning talk earlier, this is one of the worst nightmares that we both had, that our son would be kicked out of the group and we would never be able to see him again. And in fact, that happened. And we were thrown into this traumatic situation where our own son was, as he called him, Judas. And suddenly we were the parents of Judas. And this was no fun. And after that point, we actually became double agents where, in order to save our son from getting fired from his jobs, and there was a death threat delivered and all kinds of other things going on, we actually negotiated with our son to give us some information to give to the group. So the guru would kept asking us what's going on in that group, and he would give us little bits and pieces, just like the KGB, would do with the CIA. They'd give little bits and pieces, but hold the good stuff. So our guru was very thrilled that we were inside and giving him the information, and that we were on his side even against our son. How's our time doing? So in any case, this little scenario went on for over a year. Our heart was in our throat, and now we know what it's like to be a double agent. I mean, you're living on two sides of this line at the same time, protecting our son and also giving some information to the guru. We were in this real tug of war. I got panic attacks. At one time, I just crawled out onto the sidewalk because the room and the ceiling were closing in. I couldn't breathe, and I was lying out there in the middle of the night trying to breathe. Camilla had her throat, there was so much acidity going up, she had to get operated on for that. And we kept playing this game for our son's sake, because in our cult, children were not supposed to go to school or college. So if he had lost the job he had, which was tenuous because he happened to be a genius on the internet, which is why he was able eventually to bring this guru down, he would have lost his job. Because when he started this internet site, I didn't even know what a computer was. When I wrote my doctor's thesis, not one of my colleagues had a computer. And yet our son was selling Commodore 64s, I don't know if you could go that far back, out of the back of a truck and making more money than I was.
When he was 16.
When he was 16. So I mean, he had that skill, but he was very shaky, and if this group had gone to his employer and exposed him, he would have been fired in an instant and he wouldn't have gotten another job. Why? Because he was using their supercomputer at his job to do all of this website bringing down the guru. And it was on company time, it was on company computer, and as we all know, that's a no-no. So they handed me a dossier of like 20, 30 pages and said, we're going to give this to his employer unless you work with us, unless you get him to stop that website. Well, to make a long story short, he did stop the website. They withdrew the death threat. And Gunilla was very brave. She actually, the only person I ever heard in my life who confronted the guru and said, what are you going to do about that death threat? And everybody just, you don't question the guru. And he said, oh, that's not going to happen. And partially...
So he didn't deny it.
He didn't deny it, but he was caught off guard, so he didn't use his usual double talk. In any case, this internet war continued. His website got pushed down and down and down because this is a worldwide movement, and each center around the clock was pinging their false websites that they set up, these kind of pro-guru websites. They had 15, 20, 100 websites, and around the world these devoted disciples would go on and they'd get higher and higher ratings, and the critical sites, of course, would get moved down, so any internet search would not show up there. In fact, this became a lawsuit with Google and Yahoo, and eventually it did kind of change the way that they set up these priorities. If they notice, for example, after this, I won't use the name of the group, but it's in the lawsuit, that all of these pingings are coming from identifiable sites that are connected to the same source, they won't give them the same priority. But in these early days, they didn't. So after that website, he put up these first-person testimonials. Our son got a death threat. I had to go to the New York City police. And he, at the same time, was fighting to bring us out of the group because we still thought it was adolescent resistance behavior. He had been doing some fairly destructive things, as teenagers tend to do, particularly when they're escaping from this kind of very oppressive environment. So we said he's acting out. Eventually, after 2 years about, I'd say 2 years, but no, says 1 year and 3 months, he convinced us, and he got us out of there. He paid a heavy price. As soon as he got us out, he left the East Coast. He got married. He went to Portland, Oregon, on the other side of America, and we only see him about twice a year. He collapsed basically after he gave everything he could to get his parents out. So in my little paper that I wrote, I talked about the Emperor's New Clothes. If you know that story, it's about the little boy who was sitting there and saw the emperor come by, who didn't have any clothes on, but all of his courtiers and yes men said, "Oh, look at those wonderful clothes." The little boy said, "Oh, look, he's naked, he's naked." And they said, "Oh, shut up, kid, shut up." And that's exactly how he felt. Nobody listened to him. But eventually, as the pedophile priest scandal started coming, and as more and more of the Eastern gurus from Rationalizations down started being exposed, people started listening to our son, and he was believed. So after a couple of years, he really put the needle in our guru, who died, thankfully, in 2006. So in any case, that's about all I'm going to say about the actual course of events, and Gunil is going to talk about how it feels to be a mother in this situation.
Thank you. First, I always bring out the positive and the negative. The positive experiences our son had was that we had homeschool for a few years, and we also felt we should send him on trips around the world. So he has been to like 24, 25 countries, so he followed the group. And he got to manifest for peace concerts. He met Japan, businessmen in Japan after work, and sat. Yeah, right. And he gave out posters on peace concerts, and he ran peace runs with a peace torch. And he did get experiences, and he saw a lot and learned a lot. Still, I had tremendous guilt for having him in homeschooling, and which he blamed me for later with the right, because I couldn't give him everything he needed to fit into society once he was out. I thought that homeschooling would keep him in the center. Luckily, we had a background. I didn't become a disciple until I was 29, although I heard of Sri Chinmoy when I was 21, and I met him a couple of times in Sweden during peace concerts.
We're trying not to mention you.
Right. That's right. He had a lot of sports in the center, which was very positive for him. He was athletic. We had a cultural events. There were exhibitions, concerts, theater, celebration twice a year, international. All people came from all countries, and so he grew up with a big family, all ages, and ideals and ethics, I would say. The negative part was that he got more isolated, especially in New York. There were not so many boys there. And Later, he educated himself on the internet, of course, Phoenix University of Phoenix. So, although what that did to him, I really feel he didn't get the self-confidence that he had to struggle with that, and knowledge that lack of knowledge in different areas. His faith took a turn. He became an atheist for a while, and I see that among many ex-members. For a while they may become atheists. Now he's meditating with a Buddhist group, and we're very, very happy, and it feels like it was all worthwhile somehow. I also suffered a lot that we didn't give him a sexual education coming from Sweden. We started early with books and reading for him, and then suddenly we're in a celibate sect. And how do you bring up a child like that? I felt helpless sometimes, and there were a lack of education, and he has to go out. He was 18 when he left. I remember he got kicked out, and so brutal. That in itself is worth a lot of reflection. But I remember so much that scene. We tried to hold him till 18, so he wouldn't be exposed to this world that he had no clue on how it was to live in. And I see his long giraffe legs running away from us to live in San Diego, work in a restaurant, and a pretty positive environment, but still, I see his long leg, and he didn't turn around and wave to us. He was just longing to get off, have freedom. We were worried a lot for him through those following years. He had to experiment and find, and of course he exaggerated. He had so many girls, he had bad conscience, whereas we didn't feel that was so many girls probably, but and now he's married and has 2 children. So his life has really turned around. He's a wonderful man. I still couldn't talk to him for many years about his suffering, and there's still an ongoing novel. I still need to talk to him more. There were times you tried to support him as much as you could, but for him to say how much he suffered would just break my heart. It was just too much. And I'm so grateful he got the help he needed. He went 5 years in therapy with Dan also. And so we were very, very grateful for that. But I can't imagine how it would be for him to have a death threat. We also got a bribe. The teacher would pay for all his college. And he discovered the hypocrisy when he came out, and the unfairness that some could have girlfriends behind the scene and so forth. And then hearing all these testimonials, he interviewed these girls, a few of them, and he had empathy, and he was very methodical in interviewing, so they trying to figure out the truth, if they changed what they said and so forth. And he was nearly losing us. And there was a time, actually 2 months, where our teacher finally said that we shouldn't see him, and he had his motivation for that, which was very crude. And I suffered, this was my big fear, that we couldn't see him. And we were indoctrinated with this view that the people who leave, they become negative and bitter. And yes, we saw that. They came to the peace concerts and they looked like light had gone out of their face. Of course they were suffering and they were angry and hurt, and so we saw, they become negative. So that reinforced what we learned. And then we couldn't see him for 2 months, and I didn't know it would be 2 months. I thought it would be like the other examples around me, that I knew a mother who couldn't see her child for years, and it seemed like it was going to go on forever. So I just thought, I felt he was dead, and buried nearly, and I suffered. And I asked him, did you suffer during that time so much? No, he never did suffer right then. It was more when he left that he felt abandoned. And you had a father and a son, very important, in the street. He cried.
The only time I ever saw him cry, he said, "You must never abandon me again." And I started to, I teared up, and I said, "We'll never do that. We'll never do that." And he just stood there. This was in a very poor section of Brooklyn where he had moved out to the people would steal his stuff and so forth. He got himself a job as a computer expert in a hospital, but he was on the sidewalk just crying and said, "You can never abandon me again." And I said, "Oh my God, what have we done to our son?" And I hugged him and said, "We will never do that." But he has this big anger and this skepticism and this feeling of betrayal that it's taken a long time.
Also, I want to say something shortly about his reaction when he was kicked out. Of course, we left ourselves, and we felt so empowered. And by that time, the teacher, he said, your souls are going to punish you for eternity. Can you believe if we hadn't seen how he tried to cover up all his secrets and seen the way he was dealing with us, we saw his personality. So at that time, we said, "Ha-ha, lovely," we just moved in the middle of the center. We loved that the big truck came, and so it was very visible that we moved. But our son's reaction when he was kicked out and he moved to another part of New York was that I tried to reach him. We could still see him, but he couldn't see the big family. They were gone, like buried in a mass grave. He had no big family and friends who he grew up with. But we could talk, and I remember trying to reach him and talking to him on the phone, and he was mad, and he was angry, and it was so hard to reach him. And I had so much guilt. That's a bad combination. And it was really hard to communicate. And of course, later I understood the depth, a little bit of the depth of pain that he had, of course, in teenagers. It's expressed like that. And how are we doing?
We're out of time.
We're at, but would you rather talk maybe a few questions
Yes.
while people are, no one has come in yet, so if
Anyone would like to share with their stories about themselves or their children, or how it felt, or questions about us, how it happened, or how we survived, if we did. Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and laying it bare like you have. It can't be easy for you to do that. Retracing all those memories is an extremely painful time for you, for all three of you.
Yes.
But where are you right now with your son? How is your relationship with him right now?
It is quite wonderful. And we reached him through the grandchildren, because he said to us, he was like an uncle for us. We had a friend who was a lawyer who also tried to find out the truth. And our son and him, he had also left, were cooperating or working together. So, what was I going to say?
So now,
So that's what we did was our heart's desire. So we really spent time with our grandchildren, and everything got smooth, and we came closer and closer.
Is that healing some of the scars through the grandchildren?
Yes.
yes, but not all, but some. How about you? Is it happening?
The children are all they're moving on because they're a lot older now, independent from the cult, which is the important thing. Our youngest, when we decided to leave, sat on the sofa and we told her we weren't going back, and she just burst into tears and said she was going to die at Armageddon, something that we'd never told her.
She's only 8.
She was only 8 at the time. So for us, that was a compounding moment that we'd done the right thing, and that she was young enough that we could work on that, on a natural process, and it would take time. And it worked. She's now free, loves horses and paints and pictures and jumps around and doesn't talk about Armageddon anymore. So I think we've got her out of that.
There's some good stories, so it's important for us to hear them because there are some that aren't so good also, and we're all too painfully aware of them. Anyone else who wants to share? Yes?
I was wondering, when your son first approached you about wanting you to leave, how did he sort of go about that? Was it brought up in conversation, or?
Well, he had known about all this. Sure, you can take it with a
Well,
juice of thing.
Well, I'm going back before. He kind of knew about it because of his rebellious behavior. He had gone out, snuck out and gone to parties and this and that. And then he heard on the outside of the center, we weren't allowed to go on internet, look at TV, read newspapers and so forth. We meditated like hours every day of the week. So he had a view that we didn't have. He had access to information if you look at Stephen's bite model, Stephen Hudson. And so he got this information, and he was outraged because one thing an adolescent can't stand is hypocrisy. He couldn't have a girlfriend. How come they could have girlfriends? So he went in person and interviewed these people, and he put them all together on a website. Up to that point, those girls thought they were the unique divine concubine. It's first when our son went around and put them all together, it's like, oh, that's so unique, there's more of us? And that kind of was like the breakdown, the first breakdown of the center. So that's how he kind of broke the news to the outside world. Now, breaking it to us was much harder because we were forbidden to go on the internet, and finally one of Ganila's friends came up to the sidewalk and said, "Do you know what your son is doing?" And what did you say?
Well, the teacher had sent her.
Yeah.
No, I said, we have no idea what. And that, from there it all started. And we got to read some testimonials, and you started to recognize things, and you started to feel, maybe this is true. It was so shocking. And then the teacher lied to us and said, those accusations on the internet are false. And so we started to believe him again. And then after a while, slowly, maybe half time or something, we believed our son more. So then we...
It was a gradual, and he gradually pulled us out. He kept in touch through telephones, and by giving us this information that we gave to the Guru, and then we came back to him with information about what they were planning to do to him, which was really nasty stuff. They were giving pornographic newspapers to his girlfriend at the time to try and convince her that he was terrible, to break up his personal life, something they've done many times to other people. They tried to say that he would lose his job, which he would have done, and so on and so on. But he maintained it anyway.
But there is one thing that we haven't said. Since I come from Sweden and we worked for his Nobel Prize, he hid things from us more than he had an inner circle at the house, his house, and sometimes we wonder why are we not being invited to his house? We're working so hard for him and so forth. But that was that's why we didn't see all these things. And,
we only lived 2 blocks away from his house. I mean, this was so hidden and so compartmentalized that very few people knew about it.
Is the with the website that you said the testimonies were on, was it actual current members that had given?
They would have been kicked out, and we had thought of them as bitter apostates who we thought they all had mental problems. And fortunately, we knew them before they got kicked out, and it didn't seem to make sense. So once, as Gunilla said, these details came out, they seemed to match perfectly, and things started coming together. So through his website, basically, he got us out also.
And I did call one of the women, And she told me the story. She had been with him 9-10 years or so, and she had even had an abortion, and he was not empathetic at all, but he gave her money. And she told me that the sexual stuff was all very, very difficult because he was not very romantic, we could say. And that was it. And she said the worst thing was the spiritual rape. That he was supposed to be very divine and spiritually developed, and then he did all this. And this is also interesting. He had 2 daughters who he kind of adopted. I mean, they had his last name and so forth. They didn't even know about all this. They were in his house.
They claim they don't know. We still
Well, I believe one of them. You don't believe her?
Gunilla is very believes in people.
No, I didn't agree with her at all. That she didn't know about it because she expressed that she felt very guilty, that she had, couldn't help people and so on. But anyway.
I have 2 questions there. One is that who was supporting him when you were in the cult? Who was supporting him outside of the cult, financially and emotionally?
We helped him with money in the beginning, but he was very quick. He was determined to make it in the outside world. He didn't want to be. He called himself the boy in the bubble. So he broke through. He got a job, and he kept working his way up through the hierarchy.
What about emotionally?
Emotionally is the big problem, and I think that's what Gunilla was trying to talk about. He was in terrible shape.
Yeah.
And so were we, for that.
Yeah. And my second question, because in the group that I was member of, when somebody was leaving, either child or parents, Shani was very strong. I mean, parents from within and without. I mean, I am stressing from within and without. I mean, from deep down, from their heart, had to show their loved ones and have to give interview and so on. So how did you deal with this problem? I mean, especially you might say something to satisfy the leader, but what about what is going on here?
Do you want to briefly answer that and then we'll end?
Well, I think particularly in our hearts, no, we never did that. But outwardly, I think we saw that in the last presentation. Outwardly, we played along with that. But from his point of view, I mean, he thought we had. And that anger and that bitterness was directed most unfairly towards Gunilla. Because she had been, were you in Sweden when we had that contact?
No, I was in Sweden.
So I had that very, incredible moment with him on the street, and Gunilla wasn't present. And the mom always gets blamed for all the shit.
I was the disciplinarian more, and you were the playful guy.
That's so unusual. Anyway, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
And if you came in late, we have more copies.